Hello, welcome to this continuation of the Postmortem series for the Staffordshire University One-Up Internship Scheme. My name is Alex Briggs, and today I'll be talking to you about Mental Block, which is one of the free projects that we developed as part of the internship scheme. As lead producer, I'll be able to talk to you a bit more about the production processes involved, as well as the lessons that we learned throughout development. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. I'll begin with a session outline so you know what to expect from today's talk. We'll start with an introduction, a bit about myself, the One-Up internship, and Mental Block as a project. Then I'll go into the process, which will involve an overview of the game as well as the project's challenges and successes that we came across as a team. Then I'll show you a demo, which is basically the fruits of our labour. It will showcase the gameplay, the systems, the levels that we created as part of the puzzles, as well as the editor, which allows for a bit more customization on the player's part. Then I'll go into our conclusion, which will include the key takeaways and the result on my own personal and professional growth, before finally rounding off with a where to find me, which includes some contact details and social links if you'd like to talk a bit more about the One-Up internship scheme or Mental Block. As for an introduction, who am I? I am a computer gameplay design and production student in my second year of studying here at Staffordshire University. I chose Staffs for its high academic attainment and its focus on collaborative modules, which is basically where the university pulls together students from all sorts of disciplines. We come together to work on a polished game, which is then presented in front of a panel of judges. And this is quite exciting because of how it mimics the industry and gives us a flavour of what we can come to expect following our graduation once we complete our studies. Additionally, Epic Games sponsors a lot of the labs and facilities that we have on campus, which means that we have the resources to aid in our understanding of Unreal Engine, which is only becoming more and more popular within the industry. My own career aspirations include working on ambitious AAA projects, those with the headcount, the budget and the resources to actually make those deep and immersive experiences possible. So working within those creative and talented development teams has been a big goal of mine for the past 7 years now. In terms of the internship itself, we developed 3 projects within a tight 6-week timeframe, and this was within a team of about 30 developers, which was certainly the largest development team I have worked in, and I know it was the same for a lot of other people in the team as well. So this was certainly a new experience for most of us. I discovered the opportunity after talking to Chris Headland, who is our head of department, and he basically said that if I have an interest in leading teams of developers, I should consider applying for the One-Up internship scheme that summer, which would allow me to build my production skill set. I worked on both Mechhead and Mental Block during that time, where my project focus mostly concerned the latter. However, I did help out with Mechhead, especially during the earlier weeks, and also with additional production duties throughout development. The game itself, Mental Block, it's a top-down cozy puzzler inspired by Sokoban, a traditional Japanese game which involves moving blocks on a grid, and the order in which you move the blocks as well as the obstacles that you overcome is significant to actually completing the levels, and we wanted to translate that experience over to a computer game format, which was very exciting. During this time, I was lead producer, so basically communication, organisation, scheduling, scoping, and the overall workflow all came under my wing. Okay, so game production might mean different things at different studios. Generally speaking, it involves the people, the process, and the product. So for the people, producers might work hard on cultivating a collaborative working environment within the studio. For the process, you might have heard of terms like Agile, Waterfall, Lean, or Scrum. These are basically tried and proven ways of developing software and have been borrowed over from the tech industry over to the game dev industry. And then finally, the product. This is what you're making. So throughout development, producers might be checking to see if features are aligning with the design pillars and goals that we've established throughout the project, as well as seeing if it delivers on stakeholder demands and also demands of the players as well, whether that's a pre-existing community or if that's a demographic we're trying to hit. So producers are essentially the champions of the player and are advocating for the player experience throughout development. Now I'll take you through some of the images that I've laid out on the screen in front of you here. Starting off in the top left, we got an example of a sprint, which is essentially a sectioned off period of development containing tasks that we know that the team can complete within that specified amount of time. And we worked this out based on the previous sprints. So in the first sprint, we found that the team could handle packs 1 and 2 quite happily, so we scaled that up In the second sprint, we assigned them with packs 3 and 4, and then in the fourth sprint, they would finish off any of the work that they had previously that they didn't get around to doing, and also complete the final pack 5. So this allows us to schedule our time and also manage our time more effectively too. Then below that, we have an image of some meeting notes. These were what I typed up after every single meeting, and this leaves a paper trail for any future teams that might work on these games to look back and see the decisions that we made, why we made them, and also if we made any mistakes, it provides the team with that insight to ensure that those mistakes aren't repeated moving forward. Then diagonal up from that, we've got me doing a stand-up meeting there, and these were essentially 10 to 15 minutes long. These provide status updates to the team so they know how the project is going, and we also go over any tasks for that day and realign the team as well. So I don't know if you've worked in game development before, but you might find that everyone has these grand and wonderful ideas, but typically we have milestones that we need to reach and deadlines that we need to hit, so everything still needs to be contained within the scope of the project, and that is what the stand-up meetings help to achieve. Then below that, we have a value versus effort matrix. These are essentially where producers can plot the different features that we have in mind for the game and work out whether they are low or high value or low and high effort. Those that are low in value and high in effort perhaps aren't best for the game, whereas those that are low in effort but high in value, those are some easy wins and probably the features we want to be prioritizing for our game, and this is a way for us to basically prioritize the overall features within the game to ensure that production goes smoothly and we deliver the game on time. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it covers some of the tools, the processes and responsibilities that I was involved with during development. Now I can talk you through the process involved with developing Mental Block and what that looked like. Starting with an overview, our goal was to expand on the framework that we had been provided. This was an academic framework, so it was built and used by a lecturer to teach puzzle design to university students. We wanted to build on this by including new mechanics and systems such as an enemy AI, engaging level packs of which there were 100 individual levels, and a polished editor so players could create their own levels using the mechanics that we had put in place and then share those levels with their friends. And this was a multidisciplinary effort between tech, production, art and design disciplines. During this time we underwent a complete development cycle of planning, pre-production and production, as well as assets that would be ready for launch in terms of online storefronts like Steam and Epic Games Store. There were also additional milestones during this time, such as vertical slices and prototypes that we could share with the stakeholder to show that we were on track throughout development. In order to track the development of Mental Block, we would use Miro, which is a fantastic tool to both plan and collaborate within a team. Our own Miro tracker consisted of 3 parts: the pack tracker, the progress tracker and staff allocation. The pack tracker consisted of 5 level packs that we were planning to create for Mental Block. Each came with a list of components that we would aim to tick off before deeming that pack to be complete. Some of this criteria would include art assets that we would want to create to fit the theme of the pack, the mechanics that would be introduced in some packs and then would reappear in subsequent packs, and finally the level design diagrams, which would include the layout of each puzzle and also how to complete them. Meanwhile, the progress tracker consisted of a task management board with 3 columns: planned, in progress and complete. So production would work with the different discipline leads and assign developers to each of those tasks, which would then be moved to the appropriate column where relevant, and this would allow us to track the overall tasks that were outstanding in terms of the project development. Staff allocation came in particularly handy towards the end of the project. If we had any of those outstanding features, we could create feature groups around them. And sometimes this would be exclusive to one discipline. So for example, enemy AI, we had multiple tech developers trying to square that feature away at one point. But in other cases, it might be a multidisciplinary effort at this point. So for example, an artist, designer, and tech person would both come together to try and square away some of the UI and user experience features that we had left to do for the project. So that covers overall how we tracked most of the development process. So the process was not without its challenges, and we definitely learned some lessons along the way. The first one being how we were limited by non-commercial software licenses. This was a case of where our artists had been taught using the Autodesk suite of software, and we quickly found that their student licenses were incompatible with the commercial goals of Mental Block. So my solution to this was to pull on my connections a little bit and onboard someone who I knew had over 7 years of experience with Blender, which was a free software, and also you're welcome to use it for commercial purposes if you so wish. That made it a great fit for our project. So once I got them on board, I provided them with a status update in terms of how the project is going, and they quickly got to work to mentor and upskill the artists in our team and ensured that they could fully realise their artistic potential when it comes to Mental Block without feeling limited by any software or license issues. The next challenge was how our code had to be refactored. This is a case where you can imagine when you have one person working on some code, they will make sure that it's readable for them and they can easily understand it, especially if it wasn't intended for a team of people to see. However, with OneUp, those plans changed, and we did have a team of people to look at the code, and they quickly found themselves confused. They didn't know their way around. There was little documentation to go alongside it. So in that situation, the tech lead came to us at production and asked if they could refactor the code. Now, our stance at the time was what we have now works, and we don't have a lot of time in the wider scheme of things, so let's stick with what we have now. However, since the tech lead did mention that to us, I did make a note of it, and I did make some rudimentary plans, including a feature list, so we could ensure that the features that we had made were basically easily transferable to a new code base if need be, and I did work with the tech lead on that. But that is essentially part of risk mitigation, which is another important part of the producer's role, ensuring that if we do have problems later down the line, we're doing our best earlier on, being proactive, ensuring that they don't cause as much damage if and when they do happen. So in that situation, we did end up having to refactor the code, because by the week 5 point, our tech lead came to us again and said that we're tech dead, which essentially means that they've been patching up the code so much here and there that by the time they make some changes now, it breaks 10 other things. So at that point, we were able to use some of the plans that I had prepared. We were able to transfer some of the features over, but I do feel like by the end of it, if we had additional time to refine those plans, perhaps allow the tech developers to do more experimentation during the research and development phase at the start, they might have found that they could get a refactored version of the game up and running quicker, which would have eventually led to us using that earlier and not having to waste as much time at the end refactoring the game to get it functional and scrapping some of the additional features that we would have liked to include, as well as some of the additional polish. The third challenge we faced was how artists were left waiting for concept. So in this situation, a lot of the artists basically started OneUp at the same time. However, what we found was the 2D and 3D artists were waiting a lot on concept to finish their work, and that put a lot of pressure on them. So if we were to do OneUp again, I think I would stagger the development. So essentially the concept artists sit down with the disciplinary leads at the start when they establish the core design pillars for the game and the art style, etc. So by the time the 2D and 3D artists come in the following weeks, they can sit down straight away with those concepts that have been prepared, so they can use them as reference and guidance for their own artistic asset pieces. And the final challenge is during development, especially agile development, it's common to hear feedback from the team, and one of the agile tenets is to actually put people over process and adapt by responding to this feedback. So from one of the leads, I heard that we were having too many meetings, and this was breaking their flow of development. Now, during OneUp, we were having morning and afternoon meetings originally. However, what we found was a lot of the afternoon meeting information was just being repeated in the morning meeting. So rather than breaking that flow that people have at the end of the day by disrupting them with additional meetings, we decided to cut the afternoon meeting out towards the end and focus solely on those morning meetings, which we felt were more beneficial because it helps to reinforce the original goals at the start of the day, so developers know straight away what they're going to be doing. But also, by preventing that break in flow, we're optimizing the process, ensuring that development runs as smoothly as possible. We saw a number of successes and achievements, thankfully, during the one-up internship. The first being how we were able to meet that stakeholder criteria of taking the academic framework, expanding on it further, and then delivering a fun and polished game on time, which could also go on to be commercialised if need be. I'm also happy with how the team bonded within a short amount of time and morale remained high throughout despite the occasional setback. And I think part of this is down to how we as production were able to nurture that collaborative and trusting environment. So if we did come across problems, we knew that as a team, when we sort of put our heads together and worked on it together, that we could overcome it effectively. Also, I'm happy that the team were able to be agile throughout this entire process. I know that a lot of studios within the industry use agile workflows and methodologies, so having the one-up cohort practice those soft skills of communication and adaptability now will hopefully pay dividends in the long run once they graduate university and enter that job candidate pool with those sought after soft skills. And also, using their sprints, of course, helped us to successfully optimize our workflow and showed us the power of what can be achieved once we manage our time effectively. I'm also personally proud of helping to establish an open and collaborative team culture, and I think what helped is the extracurricular activities that we planned around our work days, such as going to the student bar at the end of the day to catch up, talk a bit more about ourselves, get to know each other a bit more, and cultivate that empathy and understanding, which would only reflect better in our communication skills when it comes to our work projects and making decisions that benefit the entire team. And of course, we were shortlisted for the best puzzle game at the TIGA Games Industry Awards 2023, which is a remarkable achievement because we were up against AAA studios with a lot more time and budget than we were, so everyone on their team was incredibly proud to receive that nomination. So before I head into the demo, I do just want to quickly show off all of the planning that was involved in Mental Block. If I could condense it all into one image, it would probably be this screenshot here of our Miro board. So as you can see in the bottom right corner, that might look familiar. That was some of the production elements that I showed off earlier, which is fairly small compared to everything else that was going on too. So in the top left, we have the narrative design. In the middle left, we also have some of the puzzle design elements that extend across the screen. And then finally at the bottom there, we've also got some of the UI design elements. But as for the art side, we have the concept art in the middle top. This includes things like the reference images that the concept artists would use to establish our own art style, as well as some of the themes for the packs and some character customization options as well for our playable character. And then finally on the top right, you have some of the 2D and 3D art elements, which shows off some of the lighting that we had for the level, the actual 3D models that we would also use for the characters, and even some visual effects as well that would go alongside some of the objects that we created. And dotted in between are some asset lists as well. That's just so we can tick off everything as it's made, make sure we're on track, and then we can bring it all together towards the end to create Mental Block as one cohesive game. So now I'll take you through the demo that we've prepared for Mental Block, where I can talk to you a bit more about the gameplay that's involved. So you begin the game as a little yellow robot character who can hop around the grid, which might look a bit different depending on the theme of the pack you've selected. They can go pushing blocks around the grid with the goal of landing them on those tiles that you see on the floor known as logic gates. Once those logic gates are activated by a block, the associated doors with the padlocks on top will lift, opening the path for the player to make their way to that spinning yellow spiral, which is the end point. Now complexity will build. You have different types of logic gates. The OR logic gates mean either one or the other of those logic gates needs to be activated for the associated locked door to rise, or you might come across these AND gates, which basically mean that all of the gates of that colour need to be activated for the doors to rise. So that increased with the number of colours that we have involved, as well as that rainbow coloured block you might have noticed, which is a wild card and can be used with any logic gate, all help to increase complexity. Now, as you can see, the player in this instance made the wrong move there, and they've actually been able to restart, which is a feature we wanted to include to ensure that the player isn't punished too much if they make the wrong move in one instance. Moving on, this is the level editor. This is essentially where players will be able to customize their own experience. Once players create their own level, they'll be able to share these with their friends or even the wider community on Steam Workshop. As we can see here, we have a player using the tools that we provided to create a basic level using wall blocks, doors and logic gate triggers that I mentioned earlier. We've also got some new functionality in here as well, like the paint tile, which will allow players to dynamically change the colour of the push block once it's been placed over the tile. Additionally, we've got some hazards, like the slime tile, which will freeze the push block in place if it comes into contact. But some of this functionality can also be undone through the behaviour of other blocks as well. Finally, we have the enemy AI, our blocker enemy. This can be programmed in the editor, and all of this behaviour and functionality will be saved in the same data file that can be exchanged between players. Now, our goal for the editor was to pay tribute to the origins of Mental Block, which was originally an academic tool to teach puzzle design. So we've hoped that we've sufficiently expanded upon Mental Block to add greater depth, variety, and user friendliness to the experience. So as we head into our conclusion, there's a few key takeaways that we can use from Mental Block. First of all, game development is fun as well as challenging. Allocate time in the schedule that can account for setbacks. So you're rarely going to be able to plan everything perfectly from the very start, but what you can do at least is allocate time for a buffer period. So when you do come across problems, and you always will do because software development and game development always includes so many unknowns and untreaded territory, you'll at least be able to have that time in place and reassure the team not to worry if we come across problems, because we have this buffer, this safety net that we can use to help overcome them. Managing a team of 30 plus people came with new challenges, so ensure communication and alignment are maintained. I talked a bit about this earlier, but this is essentially where you're dealing with large teams with lots of ideas whirling around, so you've got to ensure that you navigate that appropriately by controlling scope and making sure your teams are aligned at the start of every day in those stand-up meetings. Working in an agile environment promotes adaptability, but do not get too precious about process if there are issues. So this links back to when I was receiving that feedback from one of my disciplinary leads that we were having a bit too many meetings and it was disrupting their flow. In that instance, I think people are always the primary focus when it comes to production, because at the end of the day, the process is there to make the lives of the people easier, and the product would not exist if the people are not happily making it. So in that situation, always have an open ear for feedback from the team. Production is a two-way street between all the other disciplines and yourself. You're basically the glue that binds together the studio. So you need to be able to make your team's lives as easy as possible by tweaking your process and optimizing it over time. Be wary that pipelines can begin slipping as deadlines approach. Producers should work to avoid too much chaos. So this is one of the things that we found, especially because we were managing a lot of our files on Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. Those files could get very disorganized at times in terms of the folder and the structure of everything. So producers can be there on hand to basically help keep those files organized, so as people are rushing towards the end, people aren't panicking that they can't find anything, because the producers are there to help organize everything and make it easier to find for everyone on the team. Prioritize playtest builds, test and iterate ideas. Is the game fun? What is the user experience? Producers should advocate here. So as champions for the player experience, you definitely want to be prioritizing playtest builds so we can actually see if we're meeting the demands of not just the stakeholder, but also the players as well. And that feedback is important in terms of the iteration process and making sure that our product is better serving the customer, the players, than it was before. Ensure that disciplines have enough representation and that individuals or teams have ownership of specific features. So we kind of tackled this using our feature group system within the production pipeline, where if there was still some areas of the game that weren't getting actively developed or they were falling behind a bit as we were approaching our final deadline, we did have to put together those teams to square them away in the final moments. But from the start, if we had individuals or teams that could have ownership and accountability for those features, we feel like they would have got the tender loving care that they needed throughout development, rather than kind of being almost of an afterthought towards the end. Developers can often use jargon specific to their discipline, so it's important that producers are able to cut through this. So tech terms like object-oriented programming, and when it comes to parent and child class relationships, things like that, these are things that tech developers know very well, but say artists and maybe some like level designers, for example, they might not quite know what these terms mean. So having producers that are fluent in the different lingo of all the disciplines is really helpful on crossing those communication barriers between all the different disciplines within your studio. So that's where producers can come in really handy there. My final key takeaways would include how I personally enjoyed guiding the team and supporting them to put their best selves forward during the internship. I think everyone involved recognised that this opportunity does not come by very often, so we were very fortunate to get involved. I'm also very grateful for how seriously the team took the one-up scheme, and also I'm glad to see how much drive there was to actually apply what they learnt in their university studies to this industry style environment, and then creating a game that will hopefully be loved by players in the near future. The opportunity also allowed me to personally grow by building my skills in leadership, communication and organisation. So I believe I mentioned towards the start, but this was definitely the largest team that I've had to lead in terms of game development. So there were some mistakes that I learned along the way, yes, but there were also some lessons that I had learned too, and this allowed me to grow in my confidence as a producer. This in turn put me in a stronger position to apply for production placements at the start of my second year. And at the time of filming, I'm very excited to share that this allowed me to secure a producer internship at Criterion Games Electronic Arts. So I'm incredibly excited to join the teams at Criterion and EA starting in July 2024. My advice overall for students, particularly those in their foundation or first years, would be to keep an eye on one-up or other summer placement internship opportunities, as it will help to give you a competitive edge when it comes to applying for opportunities in your own placement years. To round things up, here's where you can find me. My contact information is listed on the screen there. My email is findme@briggs.com. My LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in/AlexTBriggs. And finally, my portfolio is on @briggs.com. So feel free to drop me an email or a message if you want to talk more about Mental Block or the one-up scheme in general, and I'll be more than happy to do so. Now that wraps up everything we got for today, so we'll see you next time. Bye for now.